Well, I invite you to join me in the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 18, if you'll find your place there this morning. Luke chapter 18. For those of you who are new, this summer we are engaged in a series of messages on the parables of Jesus. We're calling this Storytime with Jesus. So every week we are looking at one of these parables, and today we come to Luke chapter 18. Now, the beginning of the message today is just a little different than you may have seen, so buckle up, all right? This is Jeopardy! And today, you, members of Sunnyvale First Baptist Church and guests, you are our contestants. So let's take a look at the board, our 6 categories on the board today, so we will know what we are dealing with. Number 1, famous judges of Texas. Category number 1 on the board. Number 2, infamous judges of British history. Category number 3, famous American widows of the 20th century. Category number 4, famous widows of the 21st century. Category number 5, famous unjust judges in Jesus' parables. And category number 6, famous persistent widows in Jesus' parables. Well, I'll take famous judges of Texas for 100, Alex. And the answer is, he was the judge down on the river, Rio Grande, last century ago, 19th century. He called himself the only law west of the Pecos, famous hanging judge there who carried on his business in his saloon. What was his name? Now, I'm sorry, you have to form your answer in the form of a question. All right? Thank you. You are correct. Who is Judge Roy Bean? Well, thank you, Alex. I'll take infamous judges in British history for 100. He was the 17th century infamous judge who actually judged many of the Puritans. John Bunyan, the great Puritan, used him as one of his characters in his Pilgrim's Progress, whom he named Judge Hategood. Cue the music. Oh, okay, that would be Judge George. Who is Judge George Jeffreys? Who is Judge George Jeffreys? All right, Alex, for 100, I will take the category famous 20th century American widows. Well, she was married to her husband, the 35th President of the United States, who was assassinated in November in Dallas, Texas in 1963. Who is Jackie Kennedy? That's right. Alex, I'll take famous widows of the 21st century. She was married to Mountbatten, who was the Duke of Edinburgh, and they were married for 73 years, and he died April the 9th at the age of 99. She was married to him. That's right, although I must say it's not just who is Queen Elizabeth, to be technical, it's who is Queen Elizabeth II, because Queen Elizabeth I reigned in England from 1558 to 1603, and so who is Queen Elizabeth II? You got that right. All right, Alex, I'll take infamous judges in Jesus' parables. And the clue is, he was the judge who did not fear God, nor did he respect any human beings. Who is the unjust judge of Luke chapter 18? Well, I'll take, in this final round, I'll take famous widows in Jesus' parables. She was the widow who pestered him to death, that judge, to the point that he finally relented and found in her favor. Who is the persistent widow of Luke chapter 18? In Luke 18, verses 1 through 8, there is a fascinating parable. It is one of the very few parables in all of the New Testament where Jesus gives the purpose of the parable in the very first sentence. Luke chapter 18, beginning in verse 1. Now he told them a parable on the need for them to pray always and not give up. There was a judge in a certain town who didn't fear God or respect people. And a widow in that town kept coming to him, saying, "Give me justice against my adversary." For a while he was unwilling. But later he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or respect people, yet because this widow keeps pestering me, I will give her justice so that she doesn't wear me out by her persistent coming." Then the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. Will not God grant justice to his elect who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay helping them? I tell you that he will swiftly grant them justice. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?" Have you ever had to stand in a line somewhere, and you stood and you stood and you stood, and you finally got to the window, and then when you got to the window, they say, "Oh, actually, I'm sorry, you need to be third window down." And so you go back and get in line, and you wait, and you stand, and you wait, and finally you get up to that window, and they say, "You don't have the correct form. Here's the correct form. Go over there and fill it out and get back in line." And so you go over there and you fill out the form and you get back in line and you wait and you wait and you wait to the point that you are past your frustration level. Have you ever been in that kind of situation? Of course you have. It is the height of frustration when that occurred. Well, imagine if you were a widow in Jesus' day. And imagine that you have no husband now, he's gone, and because you have to go to court on your own, which was illegal for women to do in Jesus' day, either their husband went to court on their behalf, or their son would go to court on their behalf, or a male family member would go to court on your behalf, and because you are the one going to court, that means you have no other relative. Your husband is gone. You have no sons. You have no grandsons. You have no brother. You have no male family member. You are a widow who is all alone. And you have to go to court on your own behalf. And not only that, someone, either in your family or outside of your family, for whatever reason, is probably attempting to dupe you and bilk you financially. And you have no recourse. You're a widow. You have no one to stand up for you. And your only hope is in the court system. And so you wind up by yourself in court waiting for your case to occur before the judge. Such is the parable that Jesus gives in Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. You will never understand this parable unless you understand its context. Luke chapter 18, did you notice, follows Luke chapter 17. Did you notice that? And very interestingly, in the last half of Luke chapter 17, Jesus teaches about the future. He teaches about the day of his second coming and what it will be like. And in order to understand his parable in Luke 18, you have to understand and listen to what Jesus was teaching in Luke chapter 17, beginning in verse 22. And by the way, watch for that phrase, that three-word phrase that occurred at the very end of verse 8 in chapter 18 when Jesus said, "Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes," watch for that phrase. Luke 17, beginning in verse 22. "Then he told the disciples, 'The days are coming when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, but you won't see it. They will say to you, see there, or see, here he is. Don't follow or run after them. For as the lightning flashes from horizon to horizon and lights up the sky, so the Son of Man will be in his day. But first it is necessary that he suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. Just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. People went on eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day Noah boarded up the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. It will be the same as it was in the days of Lot. People went on eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building. But on the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be like that on the day the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, a man on the housetop whose belongings are in the house must not come down to get them. Likewise, the man who's in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever tries to make his life secure will lose it. Whoever loses his life will preserve it. I tell you, on that night, two will be in one bed. One will be taken, the other will be left. Two women will be grinding grain together. One will be taken, the other left. And then chapter 18 begins. Now he told them this parable on the need for them to pray always and not to give up. This parable is not only, listen carefully, it is not only a parable about answered prayer. It is not only a parable about persistent prayer. It is more a parable about persistent prayer than it is answered prayer. But even beyond that, this is a parable about Christians who learn to continue to pray as they wait on the day when Jesus comes again, as things in the world get more and more serious and grave every day. It is a parable of faithfulness and persistence and dependence upon Jesus, the Son of Man, his favorite term for himself in the Gospels. The Son of Man is Jesus, and he is the one who one day is coming a second time, just as he came the first time. And prior to his coming, things are going to be bad on the earth. In fact, they're going to get progressively worse. In fact, Jesus says in Luke, as well as the Gospel of Matthew, that those who are Christians will more and more be persecuted until the day that Jesus comes again. Therefore, it is imperative that Christians understand the importance of perseverance in prayer and wait on God for their justice, for they will get little of it from this world. That is the context of Jesus' parable. In verses 2 through 5, Jesus introduces us to this parable, and there are two main characters. The first character is the judge. We're told in verse 2, there was a judge in a certain town who didn't fear God and he didn't respect people. There are two things that are said about this judge, two strikes that are against him. Number one, he doesn't fear God. He's not a believer in God. He doesn't follow God. He could care less. He doesn't fear God. Number two, though he is a judge, he has no respect for people either. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about your problems. Now, he might care about you if you've got enough money to line his pockets to help him be encouraged to draw that case and call that case in your favor. But other than that, he doesn't care about you. If you're one of the down and outs from the other side of the track and you don't have any money, like maybe a widow, Does he care about you? Not at all. Here is the description of a judge who violates the two greatest commandments in the Old Testament and that Jesus gave in the New Testament. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He does neither. He doesn't love God. He doesn't care about God. He just as soon curse God. He doesn't think about God. God is not on his radar. Not only that, though he's a judge, people aren't on his radar either. He doesn't care about the people that wind up in his courtroom. Unless he can feather his own nest, unless he can fleece somebody, unless he can continue his elite status and keep his status at the country club and be able to play golf 2 days a week while he doesn't care about anybody else, being self-centered as he is, the Bible describes him as an unrighteous, unjust judge who doesn't fear God. Jesus said he doesn't fear God, and he doesn't respect people. Character number 2 in the story is the widow. We're told in verse 3, and a widow lived in that same town. And she kept coming to him. Notice the tense of that verb. She kept coming over and over and over, saying, give me justice against my adversary. Here she is, a nagging widow. She won't quit, driving the judge crazy. She represents the vulnerable of society. If you were a widow in the first century, in Jesus' day, you were in a difficult situation. Many women in the first century would marry by the age of 15 or 16. Sometimes they might be married for 10 or 20 years. Their husband would age, and because of the lifespan and so forth, many times their husband being older than they were, it was very common, just as it is today, for a wife to survive her husband. And many widows in Jesus' day were not widows who were in their 70s or 80s. Some of them were. But many of those widows were widows in their late 20s and in their 30s and in their 40s. But either way, to be a widow in Jesus' day was to be in a very precarious situation. There was no welfare. There was no social security. Your only income and your only support was primarily through your husband. When he died, the law said you cannot inherit his estate. But you can be supported out of his estate if he makes the proper arrangements for you to be supported upon his death. But if he doesn't make those arrangements, then you are dependent upon the good graces of his family. But according to Jewish custom in that day and time, if your husband died and you chose to remain connected with the family, you immediately went to the lowest person on the totem pole in the pecking order of the family. In fact, if your husband owed debt and those debts couldn't be paid, if you were a widow, you could be, it didn't happen often, but it did on occasion, you actually could be sold into slavery to pay the debts of your husband. If you were a widow in Jesus' day, you were in a desperate situation. Women did not appear in court. A man in the family had to appear before them. The fact that this woman in Jesus' parable has to come on her own would be an indication to the disciples who are listening to this parable and to you and me as we're listening to Storytime with Jesus today. That would be an indication to us that this widow is totally on her own. No support, no help. On top of that, at least in the days of Jesus, judges were required to give precedence on the docket to someone who was either an orphan or a widow. You were supposed to move them to the front of the docket and hear their case. So here she is, in the most precarious position that she could be in. And she keeps coming over and over and over and asking the judge for an opportunity to stand before him that he might rule on her petition against her adversary. And the judge, who respects neither God nor man, just keeps giving her the cold shoulder. Sorry, talk to the hand. I don't want to talk to you, lady. You can't do anything for me. And he rejects her and rejects her and rejects her. But in Jesus' story, she keeps coming back. She won't quit. She won't give up. Oh, by the way, it might be important for you to know that in the Bible, in the New Testament, and especially in the Gospel of Luke and his other book, Acts, widows play very important roles in the life and ministry of Jesus and the early church. Anna, in Luke chapter 2, when they brought baby Jesus to the temple to be dedicated, like we dedicated those two precious girls today. And so Mary and Joseph bring baby Jesus to the temple, and one of the first people that meets them in the temple is the widow, Anna. Godly woman, loves the Lord, devotes her life in service to the Lord there in any way she can help in the temple. And she immediately recognizes, as God gives her perception, this is the Messiah. And she comes and she blesses the child. And then there's that widow of Zarephath in Luke chapter 4. And she has a problem, and Jesus solves her problem. And then not only that, there's the widow of Nain in Luke chapter 7. And then there's the widow's offering at the temple in Luke chapter 21. And what does she do, this sweet little widow? She's down to her last 2 pennies. And she puts them in the offering plate. And on that particular day in Luke 21, Luke tells us Jesus was there at the temple in the offering room, where there were 13 trumpet-shaped receptacles that you would come and drop your coins in for your offering. And Jesus watched as the Pharisees came in with their handful of gold. And they had a certain way of flinging it into the receptacle, the trumpet, so that it would ding, ding, clink, clink, ding, 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 as it would go down. And people would say, wow, they're giving a lot at church today. And finally, that little widow came. And her last 2 pennies, not knowing where her next meal would come, giving her offering to the Lord and then expecting to die, dropped her little bit, her little 2 cents into the receptacle, the offering plate. And Jesus said, boys, I want you to all look. Do you see that lady? Do you see that widow? She put in more than all of the people, all these Pharisees and everybody else putting in. She's put in more than all of them. By the way, don't you think Jesus took care of that widow? Oh, yes. Yes, indeed, he did. And then there was the widows around the death of Dorcas. Dorcas was most loved in Acts chapter 9, and when she died and at her funeral, all of the widows came and were mourning and weeping at the death of Dorcas. Psalm 68 and verse 5 is a psalm that I want to remind all of you on campus today and online who are watching me what God says His attitude is toward widows. Are you a widow today? Are you a widow today? Some of you are. Psalm 68 verse 5 says that God Himself is the defender of the widow. God Himself is the defender of the widow. But now, back to story time with Jesus. So here she is. She comes day after day after day after day after day, and she can't get a hearing. The unjust, unrighteous, selfish judge won't pay any attention to her. But she just keeps on coming. She keeps coming back. She makes herself a nuisance. What a hassle she is. What a headache she becomes. I can't put up with this racket anymore. Lady, tell me, what do you want? Well, here's my case. I need you to rule in my favor. You got it, lady. Give me I'll sign on the dotted line. You are driving me out of my mind. And so he gives her what she requests. That's why we read his little monologue to himself. His little monologue to himself in verse 4. For a while he was unwilling, but later he said to himself, even though I don't fear God and I don't respect people. By the way, if that were true for me, I sure wouldn't say that out loud. Even though I don't fear God and I don't respect people, yet because this widow, look at it, keeps pestering me. That's the meaning of the term in Greek. She's pestering him. She's a nuisance. She is driving him crazy. Look at it. Even though she keeps doing this, finally I will give her justice so she doesn't wear me out by her persistent coming. That word translated wear me out in the English language is a word in Greek that means to give me a black eye. And it can be used literally, though in this case it's not used literally. It's used figuratively. This woman, by her constant bugging me and harassing me, coming day in and day out, and hear my case and please help me, she's driving me crazy. She's metaphorically, as it were, she's giving me a black eye. She's bringing me down. And I can't take it anymore. She's driving me crazy. And so just to get rid of her, not because I care, but just to get rid of her, I'm just going to rule in her favor so she'll quit bugging me. That's exactly the parable. I'll give her justice so she doesn't wear me out by her persistent coming. What a beatdown she is, the judge thought. There, the parable ends. But not the application. Because Jesus gives specific application for this parable to you and me today. So look at what Jesus says in verse 6. Then the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. Now isn't that odd? Here is an ungodly, unjust judge. And yet Jesus, to teach us something, to help us to discern spiritual truth, Jesus said, I want you to listen carefully to what that unjust judge says. And then Jesus said this in verse 7, will not God grant justice to his people, to his elect, who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay helping them? Two rhetorical questions. Will not God help those who are his elect, who cry to him day and night? Oh, yes, God will do that. Absolutely. Will he delay in helping them? Oh, no, God will not delay. Everything that unjust judge did, that's not how God will operate with those who are his children. The word elect there, you see that a few times in the Bible, is a reference to those who are believers in Christ. It's always a reference to those who are alive on planet Earth who are believers in Jesus. It's just another way of expressing people who are believers, who are followers of Christ. Will not God grant justice to those who are his? Now here's what's happening. The argument here, the point that Jesus is making is what we call an argument from the lesser to the greater. And it goes like this. How much, if an unjust, ungodly judge will only respond to a widow who continually drives him nuts, if that's true, how much more do you think that the God in heaven who is just and righteous will respond to his children who call to him in prayer for their need? And of course the answer is every way. God will respond to His children, not like the unjust judge. God is not there up there in heaven, too busy to be troubled by your little petty prayers. Why don't you? I've got bigger fish to fry. Don't you see what's going on in the world? Can you imagine God saying that to any of His children? Why are you bugging me about your son, your daughter, your job, your finances, your health, your little petty problems? Why are you bugging me with that? I've got all the problems in this world to try to figure out. Is that how God operates? No, of course not. How much more if that unjust judge will finally answer the plea of that widow? How much more will God respond to those of us who are His children when we call out to Him in prayer, and especially when we call to Him in prayer for justice? And that is the point. If an insensitive judge who cares nothing about that widow will finally give in because she keeps bugging him, how much more will God, who loves you, who is the perfect judge and the perfect Father, and who loves you as His children, how much more when you call out to Him, how much more will He not turn His back on you like that unjust judge, but rather how much more will He make sure you have what you need when you need it? Notice Jesus said that God will come swiftly. He will not delay. He will, verse 8, swiftly grant them justice. He will do that, as the word means in Greek, suddenly or soon. Swiftly is a good translation. You know what the word is in Greek? It's the word from which we get our English word taxi. What is a taxi? Anyway, what is a taxi? A taxi is a vehicle and a service that will get you from point A to point B fast. That's what a taxi is. And the Greek word is that word transliterated into English, translated here as swiftly, or sometimes translated in other ways, speedily or quickly, or different ways you will see that translated, suddenly, soon. And the focus, watch it, the focus is not on the timing. I want you to get this. Don't miss this. In the text, the focus is not on the timing, whether it's today, tomorrow, next week, or 100 years from now when the Lord comes and rights all wrongs. The focus is not on the timing. The focus is on the certainty. Your prayers are heard. Your justice will be given. It may not be given today or tomorrow, but God will see the certainty of it. The social pressures placed on Christians in Jesus' day were not different much in a real sense than many of the social pressures that are faced, that we as Christians in the 21st century in America face, with the exception of potential martyrdom, although that is true in many places in the world and ultimately may be true here in this nation in the future. It has always been tough to be a Christian. Society, social pressure has always been against true Christianity. And so the contrast is the contrast between that unjust judge and God, who is going to take care of you. Trust Him. Trust Him. I tell you, He will, verse 8, swiftly grant them justice. Nevertheless, look at how the parable ends. Look at how it begins and how it ends. How does it begin? In verse 1 of chapter 18. Now He told them a parable on the need for them to pray always and not give up. If you prayed and you've not gotten the answer you wanted, or felt you needed, and so you just quit. Or, like the widow, who is the hero of the story, by the way. Do you keep on coming to God? Trusting Him and being faithful, and a woman or a man of faith in your persistent prayers? You see what Jesus is saying here? Is God is listening. But God hasn't answered my prayer. Oh, but God is listening. Well, God, when are you going to grant me justice? Oh, He will. God is listening. And number two, the point here is God has not forgotten. God has not forgotten you. God knows of the injustice. God knows the situation. And in fact, God is going to right all of these wrongs. Sometimes He'll do it in this life, but He's going to do it when Jesus comes again, and then all of the injustices are going to be made right. And whether your injustice is dealt with tomorrow, next week, next year, or when Jesus comes again, God will see to it that you will receive justice. Therefore, don't quit, don't stop, keep on praying. Persistently in prayer, say, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is the true disciple of Jesus. That is the parable. God will respond. God is listening. God has not forgotten. And faith is needed to face the delays. Job had a lot of questions about why he was suffering, didn't he? Among those questions was his own occasionally stepping across the line of a little bit of heresy or blasphemy when he began to question God's justice in his case. God, why is all this happening? I mean, I've done everything right, and I'm suffering like crazy. My kids are dead, and my finances are gone, and I've got this skin disease from the top of my head to the sole of my feet, and I'm living on the trash dump outside the gate, outside the camp, outside of the city, scraping myself with broken pottery, in great pain. God, why? You're unjust, God. Don't tell me you've never thought it. Whether you've ever said it or not, you've thought it. Whatever you've been through in your life, just rehearse, go back, rewind the tape. In the old days when we had tapes, just rewind and reflect. Childhood, teenage years, young adulthood, median, middle age, whatever you want to call that, senior adult years. Where did God do you wrong? Where did somebody else do you wrong and God didn't intervene? Where is all of that? What Jesus is saying is this. Here's what life is like. On top of just life, here's what life is like for a Christian who follows me. The society in which you live will oppose you, will never follow you, will never agree with you. You will be viewed with suspicion by everybody else. And like the widow, the unjust judge of society will look at you and say, oh, you're one of those Christians? Why, you actually belong behind bars. I don't care whether you're innocent or not. You're the one who needs to be. You're the one who's the problem. It's you Christians who are the problem with everything on the planet. That's the world in which you live. And if you are going to survive that world, you are going to have to recognize that the opportunities for you to be unfaithful under that pressure are many. And if you are not a man or a woman of persistent prayer, you will cave. You will cave. But if you believe that He's coming again, if you have faith that He is who He claimed to be and that He will right all of the wrongs in your life and everybody else's life, then you pray with consistency and you become a person of faith who is faithful in persistent prayer. Steadfastness is impossible to achieve without faithfulness in prayer. That's the point of the parable. You want to survive? You got to become like this widow, a man or a woman of persistent prayer. And that's why Jesus said in verse 8, nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes. You see the connection with the second coming of chapter 17. When the Son of Man, I am the Son of Man, Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes again, will he find faith on the earth? Not many parables end in a question. This one does. When he returns, will he find and interpret the word faith by this word, faithfulness on the earth? Will he find anybody at Sunnyvale First Baptist Church who hasn't thrown in the towel under pressure? So we start looking around when days get tough. Well, where's our pastor? Well, I don't know. I haven't seen him. I don't have a clue. I guess he's fallen away. Well, what about Dr. Biles? I haven't seen him either. Not sure what's going on. Maybe he's gone as well. Well, what about the rest of the church? Well, I'm not sure. I haven't really seen much out of them here. I don't know. If nobody else stays faithful, if no one else stays faithful, when Jesus comes, let him find in you a faithful Christian, regardless. Regardless. Justice will ultimately come when Jesus returns. Your faithfulness should not be dependent on anybody else's faithfulness. You're only accountable for you. And therefore, persevere. Persist. Keep on assaulting God's throne with your prayers. Your prayer for that lost family member you've been praying for 25 years. Don't you quit. Your prayer for the circumstances, financially or otherwise, health-wise, you don't quit. You are trusting Him. You're entrusting your soul to a faithful Creator. You're going to be like Job. Though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. That's the viewpoint of the true disciple of Jesus who is able to persist in prayer. Hey, you want to survive? Pray. You want to survive? Continue in your prayers. God is listening. God has not forgotten. God will come through. And therefore be like the hero of the text, who is the most unlikely hero in first century Judaism, a woman who is a widow. She actually becomes the hero of the story and is the model that we should follow in our Christian life. So what are you going to do about it? What do you think Jesus wants you to do about it? What do you think His Word is right now to you? There's a seventh category on the Jeopardy board today. The category is men and women of Sunnyvale First Baptist Church who are faithful. Will we find your name there? Will we find you there? Men and women of Sunnyvale First Baptist Church who are found faithful.